oil on the surface of the land. The oil company is contacted and claims the problem's fixed. On September 4th, the Ohio EPA is notified about oil in the Broadview Heights portion of Chippewa Creek. It turns out that the well, which is only a year old, experienced a 90-degree fitting failure farther below the area initially excavated on August 29th. Oil continued to seep underground for about a week along the pipeline. An estimated 200 gallons of crude oil escaped. Oops. In case you're not familiar with our geography in the northern part of the state, the Chippewa Creek eventually enters Lake Erie, which, by the way, is our source of drinking water. Lastly, on September 24th, a few weeks ago, a resident in Broadview Heights, where a well was actively being drilled next to her property, although she is not part of the lease agreement, noticed a bad odor and a lot of black appearing in her yard. Was it oil? Yes, it was, and the fire, police, and ODNR and Ohio EPA were again called to a scene in yet another of our once quiet residential neighborhoods. It turns out that this time, the oil drilling president was happy to report that it wasn't crude oil in the yards, but it was motor oil that had leaked from one of his compressors. Wow, that made me and the residents of those properties feel so much safer in our homes. Of course, if there wasn't a well being drilled on the property next door, there wouldn't have been any oil in her yard. The point that I want to leave you with is that as long as there is a potential for risk, we should all be concerned. I haven't even touched on what this is doing to our property values or the long-term implications that this can have on our city and state. The industry rationalizes the risks by saying that no water or air contamination has been directly linked to drilling, or that the drilling of the well was fine, but it was the cement casing that failed. Does it really matter what the cause is? If our drinking water gets contaminated or our air is so polluted that it harms us and our children, do we want to risk being another cancer cluster or horrendous disease and suffering in 20 years just to make money now? We need all of you to be leaders of our state and not simply pawns manipulated by an industry wanting to take what it can from us in order to make money now. We all know that the oil and gas are finite resources that will eventually be depleted. The countries and states that realize this and are already positioning themselves for a transition to other fuel sources will have a definite advantage over the ones who are only looking at the short term. Is it wise to forsake one resource for another, say oil and gas over water, or to sacrifice one industry for another, agriculture for the oil and gas industry? Please don't let greed blind you to the facts before you. Do what's right and stop the industrialization of our beautiful state and neighborhoods for a few bucks now. Be leaders and do the right thing for Ohio residents now and in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
I didn't know if you wanted to read Michelle's.
I think that you gave a very good overview. So, as you've heard from all the testimony, what we're asking for is information and some responsibility in moving forward with fracking in Ohio. Clearly, and I didn't mention it in my statement, but the U.S. EPA is doing this study. There are a number of states where they're doing this work: North Dakota, Texas, Pennsylvania, Colorado. Those are included in the study. Here, the key issues to be investigated are possible drinking well contamination. I mean, this all has to do with safe drinking water. And so what we're asking is that we be responsible as we move forward. We cannot afford, as a state, to have our drinking water contaminated for not only the residents that are living near these facilities and near these wells. I heard from the gentleman who is the Board of Realtors, and I was talking to him, we were at a luncheon, and he mentioned to me how difficult it is to have properties near these wells and try to sell them. And it's something that didn't even occur to me. I mean, it's economic development. It's a different kind of economic development, but his industry is also impacted. So as you think about this, I challenge you to think broadly about the impacts of something like this on neighborhoods, on residences, and on businesses that expect that we'll have safe drinking water throughout the state of Ohio, and what it would look like if we didn't, and what that means to these communities in the short term, but also in the long term, which is something that we are just simply not aware of right now. So again, Representative Antonio's legislation is more about the chemicals being used in kind of an open process. Our legislation is more about a moratorium. Let's figure out what's going on in other states. Let's be smart. let's take that information and then move forward from there. So we'd be happy to field any questions. If there are questions for you two, you're going to have to come back up. They're being very shy in the front row here. Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, Representative Driehaus, could you, is it realistic to think that given job projections by the oil and gas industry that you would be able to get Republicans or even Democrats in the drilling areas in eastern Ohio to support a moratorium on drilling at this point?
We have actually a Republican legislator in the room, but I will not ask him that question. You're welcome. Look, it's important to bring the issue forward. We've been talking about this for a while. We did have an issue on the floor not so long ago about this kind of drilling on public lands. We raised a lot of concerns at that time, offered amendments to keep that from happening. To my knowledge, we wanted to have this press conference on the State House lawn. You can put a drill or an oil well right now on the State House lawn. My background's in parks and recreation. Talk about economic development and quality of life. Well, I am less concerned about whether or not this will make its way through the legislature. My concern is for the constituents of the state and for the natural resources of the state and the potential contamination of those. That's my concern. And so as a state rep from Cincinnati, Ohio, I think it falls to me to offer legislation that makes sense, that's important to my constituency, and so that's what we're doing here today.
And I don't believe that talking about a moratorium, so taking a step, taking a breath, and looking and getting the results of the research, as well as asking for the composition within the fluids, within the fracking fluids, is counterintuitive to jobs. We want people to be employed, but if we're going to encourage people and increase jobs, we also need healthy communities. And so I think also those are not counter to each other, but actually complementary. So if we want to increase our job base and the people who are coming into our state, then I welcome that. I celebrate that, but I want everyone to be healthy as well. And so to take a step back and look at the health concerns for both the water and the land, I think make perfect sense and go hand in hand with increasing jobs. Sure.
And I'd just like to say that, the governor himself has acknowledged that we don't have the workforce trained in the state of Ohio as of yet to be able to fill these supposed jobs that will be flooding into Ohio. So if we take a breath, if we study this further, it gives that workforce a chance to be trained, and so we can have people in Ohio that are trained to do these jobs while we're making sure that this is being done safely. Information's coming in from Pennsylvania where, they rushed in and did this similar scenario. Most of those workers are coming from out of state. So we would like, as the governor has said, would like Ohioans to get these jobs. We just don't have the people trained to do those jobs now. So taking a breath will allow not only for us to get this done right, but it will also allow us to train the Ohio workforce in order to make sure that they're the ones that are benefiting economically from this. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
It's my understanding that most of the gas that we're actually drilling in this country right now isn't even being used in the country. We're shipping it overseas. And so when you take a kind of risk analysis of whether it's worth pushing forward to put our water supplies at risk, as they've done in other states, we've seen the damage that we've done to local community supplies. It kind of, is it worth it when we're not even helping our energy situation in this country?
Well, and I don't disagree, but part of the problem is we're not sure what the risk is. That's part of the problem. We're not sure what the risk is, and that's exactly what we're trying to find out. What chemicals are being used, the study will prove out whether or not this has been harmful to the communities. That will identify what the risks are. So really, we need that information before we move forward, whether we're retaining that locally or not. We still have this risk factor, and we need to create this balance between the drilling and the safety of the community. Sure.
Sorry.
See, you should have seen
Should
it.
I just stayed here? I just wanted to point out, too, it's interesting, places that have banned fracking already, and France is one of the countries that has banned fracking in their country. They don't want it. But it is a French company that's building the plant in Youngstown, Ohio, a steel plant to make fracking tubes. So do you think they want the energy? Yes, they want the energy. Do they care if they pollute Ohio to get the energy? Probably not. So, that to me, I think we really need to start putting two and two together here with this. We need to be careful and respectful of our state and our resources. West Virginia to the south, too, is one of the most resource-rich states that there is in the country, but it's consistently been one of the poorest states. Sorry.
Any other questions?
You probably mentioned this, I'm sorry, I apologize for this. I just want to make sure I understand. The situation you're talking about in your neighborhood, that is horizontal fracking?
Yes, they're directional drilling, yes, and fracking the fluid.
Anybody else?
If they drilled in the State House lawn, wouldn't they end up in the parking garage?
Well, I don't know. There's something else to figure out. The point is that there should be some sacred lands. I think our parks are sacred lands. We're stewards. We're state representatives. We're elected officials. We're supposed to protect the lands in the state instead of having them available for drilling. We're talking about a fraction of the land in Ohio, and to do that to our parks, it's not the footprint of the drill. It's the water coming in, it's the trucks coming in, it's the water going out, it's the retention basins. It's much broader than this one spot where the drill is located. And so I frankly think it's incumbent upon us to take a long-term view of this as representatives of the state and say, you know what, some of this doesn't make any sense, and drilling on public lands doesn't make sense. I simply use the State House lawn as an example of public land. You could go to Ohio State University and find some public land up there too that would be available.
And I'd like to say that it's interesting that now what's happened with our public lands that we don't have any local control seems to be what has happened to communities. Because during the process of this industry ramping up, local communities no longer have control over what happens in their neighborhoods. They don't have recourse. They can't zone. They can't prevent these drills from coming into their community. They can't prevent this industrial-urban interplay from happening because, they don't have any local control. There's no home rule. So that, is a big, it's a big problem. So now, our parks essentially and the State House are in the same boat.
In the last legislative session, I believe it was a bipartisan bill passed that, at least backers say, is one of the toughest, not fracking, but just general drilling regulations, toughest drilling regulations in the country. Why is that not enough in your eyes?
Well, why wouldn't we wait for a federal study, knowing what's going on? We can't be blind to what's going on in other states. We've got problems. We've got folks lighting their faucet water on fire in neighboring states. We cannot act as if we don't know that there are risks with fracking. And so the United States EPA is undertaking a study. Why wouldn't we, as intelligent, responsible legislators, want to wait until the conclusion of that study, which will be very broad, and you heard me describe the process that they're going through. Why wouldn't we wait until that information is available to understand what the complications are, what the risks are, and then move forward? I don't understand this idea that it's okay now, we may not understand it. Well, we do know some of the risks. People are lighting their faucets on fire. We've seen it. I don't know if you've seen, I've seen now a couple different movies, or really they're like documentaries, of this very thing. So I don't know that it's responsible to ignore those kinds of things and try to understand what the long-term impacts are. And that's what this legislation is about.
And I just want to add the anecdotal information that's out there, even in Ohio, should give us pause then. If someone is having the contamination in their home, we heard last week from a family that had to have their gas turned off because there's too much gas coming out of the faucet, and the gas company said, well, you can't have the gas on because it's dangerous. Yes, it is, but now they don't have water or gas. They don't have a home to live in. And so if those things are happening, then we need to take this step back, get the results of the EPA study, and then go forward in a safe, productive way. But clearly, whatever those requirements were are not stopping this from happening right